Have you ever stood at the edge of a quiet lake at dawn, the mist curling around your ankles like a secret, and felt for a single perfect moment that the world belonged to you? My name is Graham Walker. If you've ever loved a place so much, it feels like it lives inside your bones, or found yourself longing for a time before everything changed, you might recognize a little of yourself in my story. Before heartbreak, before inheritance, before I learned that families can be both anchors and storms, I was just a kid in Maple Harbor, Minnesota, a boy with skinned knees, wild dreams, and a mother who believed in building more than just houses. She built rituals, sunrise pancakes, bedtime stories, muddy walks by the shoreline. Back then, our home felt sturdy as stone, every window warm with laughter, every board creaking with history. There are some memories I keep pressed flat like leaves in a book, my mom humming as she sketched garden plans at the kitchen table, my dad Douglas teaching me to tie perfect knots in the boathouse, the rich cedar smell of my favorite old sweater after summer storms. Maple Harbor wasn't big, but it was everything to me. I knew every pine, every shortcut, every echo of kids' laughter across the water at dusk. Even after my mother's illness crept in a slow, quiet shadow, I believed we were invincible. Some part of me thought if I held her hand tight enough, she would always come back. But grief is like a winter thaw. It comes slowly, then all at once, and when it leaves, nothing looks the same. The day we buried my mother, I was 13. I remember how cold the church pew felt, the way my father's arm seemed heavier than ever as it settled around my shoulders. Change didn't rush in with sirens and drama. It moved softly, as if it didn't want to disturb the dust. A year later, my father remarried. Sharon arrived with a warm smile, well-practiced charm, and 2 children of her own. Allison, a girl my age, with a fast, nervous laugh, and Reed, quiet and sharp-eyed. For a while, I thought maybe our patched-together family could be something gentle. But houses have ways of remembering. Little by little, the snapshots of my mother disappeared from the mantel. Her teacup in the cupboard was replaced with new matching sets. The treehouse she'd helped me build was unsafe, then quietly dismantled. At family dinners, my jokes fell flat. Plans I once made with my father were met with, "Let's talk about it later." At first, I told myself it was just what grown-ups did. They moved on, made space for new love. But underneath, a different feeling began to grow. A quiet sort of ache. A worry that maybe there wasn't space for all of us after all. Looking back now, I realize how easily a family can shift around you without anyone meaning to hurt you. I tried to belong, helped Allison with homework, listened to Reed's stories about outer space, showed Sharon the hidden trails through the birch woods. But the laughter that used to fill the kitchen faded, replaced by small politenesses, and a sense that every day I was being gently, almost lovingly moved to the edge of my own story. I clung to what I could, weekend mornings alone by the lake, the old boat my dad and I patched every spring, my mother's last garden still blooming wild with purple asters. What I didn't understand then was how powerful memory can be when the present starts to slip away. You tell yourself, it's enough, I can adapt. You hide your grief, your longing, even from yourself. But there's only so long you can hold your breath in your own home before you forget what it feels like to belong. This is the part where most stories would tell you that time heals everything. I wish that were true. In reality, time just teaches you how to carry what you can't set down. For me, that meant learning to build walls in my mind and my heart, even in the spaces I loved most. I poured myself into school sketching parks and playgrounds in my notebooks, promising myself I'd design places where no one would ever feel left out. But at home, the cracks widened. My dad stopped asking for my opinion on big projects. Allison and Reed grew closer, sharing inside jokes I was never quite in on. Sharon decorated for holidays with new traditions, and soon even the familiar seemed foreign. If I could talk to that younger version of myself, I'd tell him this: you are not the problem. Sometimes families change because the world spins, not because you did something wrong. And sometimes love means letting go of what was, even if you're not ready. If you've ever felt the ground shift beneath your feet, or stood outside your own front door and wondered if anyone would notice if you were gone, then you know how quietly heartbreak can arrive. This is the story of how I lost everything I thought I was supposed to inherit and what I found in the empty spaces left behind. It's about second chances, the courage to return when you're sure you've been written out, and the kind of redemption that grows in the cracks between regret and hope. I hope you'll walk with me along the shoreline, because sometimes the place you end up calling home is the one you fight for, not just the one you're given. Looking back, I realize there are moments in every family where the ground seems to move beneath your feet, but you're expected to keep walking as if nothing changed. My new world with Sharon, Allison, and Reed began quietly enough shared breakfasts with different cereals, birthday cards, and unfamiliar handwriting, laughter at the wrong kind of jokes. My father tried to keep the peace juggling old routines with new expectations, but harmony, I've learned, can sometimes be just another word for silence. The first Thanksgiving together, I watched as Allison snapped green beans next to Sharon, while my mother's old recipe card stayed buried at the bottom of a kitchen drawer. I told myself it was just food, just a meal, but grief can show up in the smallest rituals. That night, I slipped away early, wandering down to the dock, letting the sounds of distant laughter and clinking glasses drift across the water. The lake was my only constant, the place I could still breathe. Blended families are common here, and I know now our story isn't rare. Maybe you've seen it, the subtle alliances that form the gentle, sometimes accidental drawing of lines. Allison and I were close in age, but not in spirit. She had grown up with Sharon's routines, inside jokes, a shorthand I couldn't crack. At first I tried to belong, helped her with homework, invited her to skate on the frozen bay, offered a place beside me during school assemblies. But most invitations returned unopened. Reed, 3 years younger, mostly watched from the sidelines, clinging to Sharon's sleeve in crowds quiet as snow. There were no villains, just people trying to hold on to what little made them feel safe. I see now that we were all in our own ways building walls to protect our hearts. When I talk to friends about those years, so many nod with understanding. One, Claire, tells me about growing up in Arizona, suddenly sharing a bathroom with 3 stepbrothers after her mom remarried. She laughs about turf wars over cereal, but admits the hardest part wasn't the noise, it was feeling invisible at the breakfast table. You just want someone to notice when you're gone, she told me. And it's true, the quiet hurts more than the shouting. I know there are thousands of American kids, maybe millions, who recognize that ache. It's not about malice. It's about everyone quietly grieving the shape of family they used to know. I started to notice the small things that marked my distance from the center. At dinner, Sharon would ask Allison about her piano recitals, Reed about his science projects, and then turn to me with the sort of polite curiosity reserved for a visiting cousin. My father, never one for confrontation, retreated into long hours at work, hoping time would smooth the rough edges. It didn't. I missed the days when I'd help him draft blueprints late at night, or tag along to job sites watching him make something solid out of scattered dreams. Now Allison had a desk beside his in the office. My own drawings gathered dust in a box beneath my bed. I pretended it didn't matter, but the truth was, I felt unmoored, like a guest in the house my mother built. There's a kind of loneliness that seeps into your bones when you can't name what's wrong. I remember one winter afternoon, trudging home after school, finding the old treehouse in the backyard torn down. Sharon said it was unsafe, but it felt like another erasure. I tried to protest, but the decision had already been made. It's just a treehouse, my father said, not meeting my eyes. But it wasn't. It was the place where I'd spent hours with my mother, building worlds out of pine and rope, hiding secret notes in the rafters. Now it was as if those memories no longer fit into the family's new design. I learned then that sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones that never quite get spoken aloud. One lesson I keep returning to is this: you cannot force belonging, no matter how hard you try. You can show up, extend kindness, learn the new rules, but some boundaries are invisible and immovable. At school, I threw myself into track-built friendships that didn't require careful negotiation. Let myself be just Graham for a few hours every afternoon. Home was another matter, a place of polite pleasantries, closed doors, and the slow, steady rearrangement of photographs on the wall. I watched my father fade behind his responsibilities, hoping things would settle if we just tried harder. Sometimes he'd stand in the kitchen late at night, staring out at the lake with the same haunted look I saw in my own reflection. Families aren't puzzles you can force together with enough pressure. They're living things, growing, changing, sometimes fracturing, under the strain of too much hope or too little honesty. There were moments when it almost worked the Christmas. We all made gingerbread houses the rare summer evening we roasted marshmallows, and everyone laughed at Reed's wild ghost stories. But those moments were islands in a widening sea. More often I felt the absence of what had been of my mother's easy humor, my father's undivided attention, the certainty that I belonged without question. It's easy to romanticize the past, but loss has a way of sharpening every memory until even the happy ones sting. If I could give advice to anyone living through something similar, it would be, this grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it's the way you hesitate before joining a conversation, or how you flinch when someone calls you by a nickname that isn't yours. And it's okay to miss what you've lost, even if no one else notices that it's gone. We don't talk enough about the slow ache of adjusting to new family lines, the invisible work of holding your own story together when it feels like everyone else has moved on. The world is full of people quietly carrying disappointments, quietly hoping for a place to land. As high school blurred into late nights and early mornings, I became an expert at reading the room, knowing when to fade into the background, when to offer help, when to keep my mouth shut. My father started leaving more of the business in Sharon's hands. Allison shadowed him on big projects. I watched from a distance, both proud of my skills and painfully aware that the place I dreamed of earning at his side was quietly being reserved for someone else. Looking back, I wonder what might have changed if any of us had been brave enough to name what we were feeling. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But silence, I've learned, is its own kind of inheritance. I carried that silence with me year after year like a stone in my pocket. It shaped my ambitions, my friendships, even the way I fell in love, always a little cautious, always half waiting for the ground to shift again. It wasn't until much later, after everything else had come undone, that I realized the most important spaces we ever design aren't buildings or towns or beautiful shorelines. They're the spaces we make in our hearts for each other, even when it hurts. That's what I wish I'd known then, that belonging isn't something anyone can give you. It's something you have to fight for, even when your hands are shaking. But fighting for your place in a family, or in your own life, isn't a battle won in a single day. Sometimes it means holding on a little longer, even as the view from the shore keeps changing. Other times, it means knowing when to let go. My journey into adulthood would demand both. And as my father's business grew, as the shadows in our house lengthened, I found myself at a crossroads, one where loyalty, longing, and the need to stand for what matters most would collide in ways I could never have foreseen. And that, I suppose, is where the story truly begins to turn. By the time I turned 22, Maple Harbor had begun to feel more like a memory than a home. My world had shifted in small but unmistakable ways, each change barely noticeable on its own, but together, they formed a gap I could no longer ignore. Walker & Sons Design. The firm my father Douglas had started with nothing but a box of tools, and a stubborn hope was no longer just a family business. It was becoming a brand. New signage, new uniforms, and new ideas swept through the office. Sharon had a talent for making everything gleam, from polished hardwood floors to polished financial statements. Allison, always eager to prove herself, became Dad's shadow, taking notes in meetings, offering input on projects, and gradually assuming a place that once seemed destined for me. At first, I tried to see it as a chance to redefine myself. I threw myself into design pitching ideas for affordable community spaces and gathering spots where every kid could find somewhere to belong. I dreamed up open-air amphitheaters and pocket park sketches piling up in my desk drawer. But my proposals were met with polite nods and promises to review later, always later. Sharon and Allison favored boutique developments, expensive, exclusive, the kind of places that promised luxury but left so many on the outside looking in. There's nothing wrong with ambition, I reminded myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our family was leaving something important behind. Maybe you've lived through a similar shift. Maybe you felt the ache of watching traditions get updated, of realizing that the space you once filled is quietly shrinking as someone else's priorities grow. In my case, it wasn't a single argument or one dramatic betrayal. It was the slow erasure photos of my mom replaced with branded awards, my favorite reading nook now a glass-walled office for client calls, company barbecues, morphing into wine and cheese networking nights. At home dinner, conversations revolved around ROI and client portfolios instead of campfire stories or Saturday fishing trips. The past was fading, replaced by a future I barely recognized. I still remember the day my desk was moved. It was subtle, Sharon's suggestion presented as an opportunity for more privacy, but it felt like being relocated to the edge of a world I once helped create. My father, tired and distracted, signed off without a second thought. I spent that afternoon boxing up childhood treasures, faded sketches, my mom's gardening gloves, a blue ribbon from the county fair. There was no confrontation, no heated exchange. Just the dull thud of a door closing behind me as Allison took my old seat, sunlight streaming across her neatly labeled folders. This kind of displacement isn't uncommon. I've heard it from friends who came home from college to find their bedrooms turned into fitness rooms or whose parents handed down family businesses only to modernize them beyond recognition. Change is necessary, of course, but there's a cost when evolution leaves no room for the stories and people who made the foundation. When you're pushed to the edges, you start to wonder if maybe you were the problem all along. That doubt is hard to shake, especially when everyone around you seems to thrive in the new order. I tried to hang on, hoping things would shift back. Sometimes my dad would catch me in the hall, clap a hand on my shoulder, and say he appreciated my vision, but then he'd rush to another meeting, and I'd be left with blueprints no one wanted to review. One evening, I found Sharon and Allison celebrating a big contract in the kitchen, their laughter spilling out over a bottle of champagne. I congratulated them, forced a smile, then slipped out to the lakeshore, my shoes crunching through autumn leaves. The dock was cold, the water black and endless, but it was the only place I still felt like myself. Looking back, I realize now that some families drift apart, not through anger, but through neglect, by letting small decisions pile up until the center no longer holds. Sharon and Allison weren't villains. They were just chasing a vision of success that didn't leave much room for people like me, the dreamers, the memory keepers, the ones who saw value in what was shared, instead of what could be sold. My dad, caught between love and fatigue, chose the path of least resistance. I don't blame him. Sometimes when you're tired enough, the quietest voice in the room is the first to fade. The real turning point came during a meeting about the old Ridgeside property, a lakeside plot my dad and I had once planned to turn into a youth center. I presented my proposal modest, inviting a place for after-school programs and community events. Sharon countered with a luxury spa concept complete with a private marina and members-only dining. Allison backed her up with market research and glossy mood boards. My father hesitated, then nodded along with them. Maybe we should think bigger, Graham. Times are changing. That was the moment I felt the door close for good, not because my idea was rejected, but because it was no longer even considered. If there's a lesson here, it's that you can't force people to see your value if they're committed to a different vision. You can only offer what you have, your ideas, your heart, your best intentions. After that, you have to decide whether to keep knocking on a locked door or to start looking for a window. For me, the decision came slowly, almost gently, like the end of summer. One day I looked around the office and realized I didn't recognize the place anymore. It wasn't just the decor or the new technology. It was the feeling that my story no longer fit inside these walls. So I made a choice one I didn't yet know would change everything. I started looking for work elsewhere, reaching out to colleagues in Seattle and Minneapolis, updating my portfolio with the projects I was most proud of, even if they never saw the light of day in Maple Harbor. I felt guilt, of course. I worried about abandoning my father, leaving Reed behind, losing the last bits of my mother's legacy. But I also felt a quiet relief. For the first time in years, the horizon seemed open again. When I think about that season of my life now, I see it not as a tragedy, but as a necessary reckoning. Sometimes the hardest part of growing up is realizing that home isn't a place, it's the people and principles you choose to carry with you. And sometimes to honor what matters most, you have to risk letting go. The day I packed my things for Seattle, the sky over Maple Harbor was gray and unsettled, but I felt oddly calm. I left a note on my father's desk, thanked Sharon and Allison for the years we'd shared, and walked out without looking back. I didn't know what waited for me on the other side of that decision, only that I was finally choosing myself. What I couldn't know then was that distance, once a source of pain, would become the very thing that brought me home again, just not in the way I ever expected. The first weeks in Seattle felt like walking barefoot on new grass, unfamiliar, a little thrilling, and always just shy of comfortable. I rented a tiny studio above a bakery where the scent of sourdough drifted in each morning, and the hum of the city kept me company at night. Work came slowly, at first a patchwork of contract jobs, community mural projects, and late nights drafting proposals in a coffee shop that stayed open till midnight. I was a long way from Maple Harbor, but the distance gave me room to breathe. For the first time in years, I was free to imagine who I might become if I wasn't always chasing approval or defending old dreams. And yet every time I finished a project, I'd catch myself thinking, would Dad be proud? Would Mom have liked this park, this playground, this mural home it seemed wasn't so easily left behind? Loneliness is an odd companion. There were days when it felt like freedom. Days when I walked for hours along the rainy waterfront, watching ferries disappear into the mist, no one expecting anything from me, except maybe the next month's rent. But other days, it was a heavier kind of silence. I missed Reed's knock on my door, Dad's booming laugh in the garage, even Allison's relentless optimism. I learned quickly that starting over isn't just about building something new. It's about learning to carry what still aches without letting it drown you. One night, after a long shift helping renovate a public library, I sat on the rooftop and wrote a letter I'd never send Dear Dad. I hope you're well. I hope you still remember the plans we made. If you've ever left home, truly left, not just moved out, you know that the world has a way of testing your resolve. I met people who were also beginning again, a teacher from Texas, an artist from Detroit, a barista saving for law school. We traded stories over cheap beer and folding chairs, each of us quietly measuring what we'd gained against what we'd lost. I envied their confidence, their certainty that reinvention was as simple as a new address or a new job title. For me, the past had roots. No matter how many city blocks I walked, part of me was always waiting in Maple Harbor's cold lake water, watching the morning fog drift between memories. There's a practical side to new beginnings that no one likes to mention. The paperwork, the endless applications, the way every interview seems to require you to summarize yourself in a single confident sentence. I stumbled at first. I forgot to eat dinner, missed a deadline or two, once went a week with a broken heater, because I couldn't quite admit I needed help. But these stumbles taught me resilience in ways comfort never could. I learned to budget, to cook for one, to navigate city buses and difficult conversations. Each small victory, a compliment from a project manager, a sketch praised by a mentor, became a stepping stone toward something steadier. In time, the unfamiliar became less intimidating. Sometimes I would visit the small parks I'd helped design, a swing set here, a community garden there, and listen to the laughter of strangers. It reminded me of what first drew me to this work, the hope that a thoughtfully designed space could make even a single person feel more at home. I realized, too, that I wasn't alone in missing the places and people who shaped me. One afternoon, I met an elderly man named Sam who tended sunflowers in a public garden I'd helped plan. We fell into conversation, and he told me he planted them every year in memory of his wife. Every summer I come back, he said, just to see what's grown. In his quiet ritual, I saw the thread connecting us all, how love, loss, and hope cycle through every season, binding us to our beginnings, even as we move forward. For a while, I managed to keep Maple Harbor at a gentle distance, like a photograph you tuck in a drawer, but never really forget. Then, one autumn evening, a message from home cracked the surface of my new life. Reed, who'd always kept things simple, sent a text that said only "Dad's sick, hospital. Not sure you care, but thought you should know." My chest tightened with a guilt I thought I'd left behind. In that moment, the long shadow of unfinished conversations and unsaid apologies stretched all the way from the old house by the lake to my little apartment above the bakery. I didn't know what I was supposed to do: rush home, pick up the phone, or just sit in the dark and wonder if it was already too late. It's a strange thing the way crisis can break through the boundaries we set around old wounds. All at once, every decision I'd made, leaving, staying away, trying to move on, felt impossibly heavy. I called Reed. The phone rang 4 times before he answered, voice muffled and flat. "It's bad, Graham. The doctors don't know." There was a pause, a silence full of everything we'd never talked about. "Sharon says it's under control. Allison's here too." I thanked him, said I'd figure something out. After we hung up, I sat staring at the wall, the city outside, oblivious to the ache that had come rushing back. If there's a lesson hidden in these moments, it's that we never really outgrow the longing for connection, even when we convince ourselves otherwise. We try to build new lives, new families, new routines, but the old stories still tug at us in unexpected ways. It's okay to start over, to chase your own dreams, but sometimes you also have to circle back, face the things you left behind, and decide what still matters enough to fight for. No amount of distance can truly sever the ties that shaped you. It just makes it harder to pretend you don't care. I spent that night walking Seattle's damp streets, wrestling with the question that had haunted me since the day I left. Was it possible to come home again after everything that had changed? Would I even recognize the place I once called mine? And more honestly, would they recognize me? As dawn crept over the city, I made my decision. I would go back to Maple Harbor. Not because I thought I could fix what was broken, but because some goodbyes are worth showing up for no matter how late. What I didn't know was that returning would open doors I'd thought closed forever and unlock secrets I never imagined my family still kept. Returning to Maple Harbor felt like stepping into a photograph faded at the edges, a place at once familiar and strangely distant. The drive from the city was lined with trees already turning gold and crimson, the sky heavy with the promise of early frost. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter the closer I got every mile, blurring the years I'd spent away. I replayed Reed's voice in my head, heard the worry tucked behind his words, and wondered how many apologies we'd both let slip through the cracks. I was prepared for awkward silences, for questions no one wanted to ask, but nothing could prepare me for the emptiness of home after loss. The house looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the wild flowers and handmade wind chimes my mother once loved. Instead, there were manicured hedges, fresh paint, and a front porch swept clean of memory. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt the weight of all the things left unsaid. Sharon met me at the door, her smile tight, a careful mask of hospitality stretched over old tension. Allison hovered in the hallway, half turned away, as if unsure how to greet a brother who'd become a stranger. Reed, taller, now gave me a hesitant nod before vanishing into his room. My father's absence rang loudest of all. The spaces where he used to be, the worn chair by the window, the tool rack in the garage, the place at the head of the table seemed impossibly empty. We circled each other for hours, offering cups of tea, brief updates, polite questions. Underneath it all, grief sat with us like a silent guest, shaping every word and every pause. That first night I couldn't sleep. I wandered the halls in socks, stopping by closed doors and half-lit rooms, searching for pieces of the past I wasn't sure I wanted to find. On my father's desk, I saw papers stacked with clinical precision medical bills, legal documents, half-finished notes written in a shaky hand. A photo of the family taken years ago sat in a silver frame. We all smiled at the camera, sunlight dappling our faces, but even then, I could see the gap between us, a space where something vital had already begun to slip away. Grief has a way of sharpening old regrets, of making every small memory seem both precious and unbearably fragile. In the days that followed, we moved through routines with the stiffness of people playing roles they'd never rehearsed. Meals were quiet, the television always on in the background. I tried to help where I could, fixing a leaky faucet, organizing my father's old blueprints, offering to pick up groceries. Sharon accepted my help with a nod, but little warmth. Allison seemed grateful, but our conversation stalled before they ever began. Only Reed late at night would sit with me on the back steps sharing stories in broken sentences. He talked about school, about the projects Dad had hoped to finish about the lake, and how it didn't look the same with the new developments creeping in along the shoreline. Sometimes I wondered if I had any right to be there. After all, I was the one who left, who missed birthdays, who ignored calls when the distance felt easier than the pain. I saw the same question flicker in Sharon's eyes. Why come back now if you've ever been in that position, returning to a family changed by absence, unsure of your place? You know the ache of wanting forgiveness without knowing how to ask for it. The truth is, there's no map for grief, no script for finding your way back. You try step by tentative step, hoping that simply being present will do what words cannot. One afternoon, as I sorted through my father's files, I found an old notebook in his handwriting, a list of projects he never finished, ideas scribbled in the margins, rough sketches for a community dock we once dreamed up together. I ran my fingers over the paper, remembering the summer we spent building models from scrap wood, the way he'd let me measure twice just to be sure the pride in his eyes when the final piece fit. That memory hit hard, a reminder that love often hides in the everyday work we do together, in plans made and plans abandoned. Sometimes what hurts most isn't the loss of what was, but the knowledge of all that might have been. I realized as the days passed that grief isn't just about losing someone, it's about learning how to live in the spaces they leave behind. Each of us carried it differently. Sharon with her order and her lists, Allison with her long walks by the lake, Reed with his questions about what came next. For me, it was the silent mornings, the urge to call my father just to hear him say, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out." In these moments, I learned a truth that took years to accept. Coming home doesn't always mean finding what you left. Sometimes it means seeing clearly for the first time what's been lost and what still remains. In American families, we often talk about moving on as if it's a straight path, as if the wounds of absence can be tidied up with time and intention. But grief resists order. It loops and stutters and returns when you least expect it, turning milestones into reminders, celebrations into shadows. The best we can do, I think, is to show up for one another, not with perfect words, but with patience, with listening, with the willingness to sit in silence when that's all that can be offered. I tried to do that in those early days back, tried to let my presence speak where my voice could not. There's a lesson in all of this one I carry even now. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a process of returning, of showing up again and again, even when it's uncomfortable. It's about choosing to build new bridges, plank by plank, across old divides. For some families, that bridge never quite reaches the other side, but the act of building is what matters most. As the week unfolded, the emptiness of my father's absence slowly began to fill with small gestures, a repaired hinge, a shared meal, a laugh that escaped when no one was looking. Piece by piece, something like hope returned. What I didn't know as I swept the porch one evening was that the past was about to press itself into the present in ways none of us could predict. There were secrets in that house, papers tucked away, old keys hidden in drawers, conversations half-finished that would change everything we thought we knew about what it meant to inherit, to belong, to forgive. And so, as the autumn wind rattled the windows, I found myself standing on the threshold of a truth larger than any I had faced before, one that would force all of us to choose between clinging to loss or building something new together. It started with a drawer that stuck. One afternoon, searching for a pen in my father's old desk, I tugged at the bottom right-hand drawer and found it wouldn't budge. I almost gave up, then remembered a trick from childhood: pull, left, then up, then out. It slid open with a creak, revealing an envelope with my name written on the front in my father's looping script. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned it over in my hands. Inside was a brass key, heavy, worn, and unmistakably old. There was also a note: "Graham, if you're reading this, I trust you. The key is for the place that mattered most to both of us. Take care of it, Dad." I sat there a long time, the key cool in my palm, thinking of all the afternoons we'd spent together fixing broken locks or searching for lost tools. The boathouse. I knew it before I even stood up. When I was young, Dad and I spent endless hours down there, sanding planks, tying ropes, dreaming up wild projects for summer. It had always been more than a storage shed. It was a workshop, a hideout, a place where the world felt safe and wide open. As the family changed and the house filled with new rules, the boathouse became my sanctuary. It was the last place in Maple Harbor that still felt like ours. I hurried outside, the key clenched in my fist, half afraid of what I might find after all these years. The path was thick with fallen leaves, the lake bright with late afternoon sun, and for a moment I was a boy again, running to keep up with the man who taught me to build and believe. The lock turned easily, almost as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, dust hung in golden shafts, settling on half-finished projects and jars of rusty nails. The workbench was just as we'd left it, my initials scratched into the wood, a faded blueprint pinned to the wall, the old radio Dad swore he'd fix one day. I stood in the doorway, breathing in the smell of cedar and oil, and let the memories settle around me. For the first time since returning, I felt a rush of gratitude that not everything had been swept away by time and good intentions. There's a lesson in that sometimes the things that endure aren't the ones most carefully preserved, but the ones that are simply left alone to wait for you. On the workbench beneath a coil of rope, I found a manila folder with another note, "For Graham when you're ready." Inside were legal papers, a lease agreement notarized and signed, granting me exclusive rights to the boathouse and a generous strip of shoreline for 75 years. The document was airtight, the language precise. My father's signature stood out in bold strokes, unwavering even in the last months of his illness. At first, I struggled to understand what it meant. Why hide this from the rest of the family? Why not talk to me openly before things became so tangled and hard? But as I read through the pages, it became clear. My father had wanted to protect something. Maybe for me, maybe for Maple Harbor, maybe for the memory of all we'd built together. I brought the papers to the kitchen that evening, hands shaking a little, and showed them to Reed. He read quietly, lips moving, as he traced the words. "He left this for you," he asked. Voice hushed. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Allison joined us, scanning the documents with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. I never knew she whispered. Sharon never said a word. That night, we sat around the old kitchen table papers, spread between us, the brass key glinting in the low light. For a few moments, it felt like the old days again, siblings united by mystery curiosity, and the fragile hope that maybe we weren't as divided as we thought. Real-life families have secrets. Sometimes they're small, a hidden recipe, a box of photos under the bed. Other times they're huge, a change in a will, a secret deed, a story that never quite made it into the family album. In America, I've learned people often keep secrets to protect the ones they love, or maybe to avoid difficult conversations. But secrets have weight. They shape our choices, our relationships, and the stories we tell about ourselves. My father's secret was one of love, but also of fear. Fear that conflict would tear us further apart, or that the vision he cherished would be lost to time or compromise. What mattered most in that moment wasn't the property or even the power the lease might give me. It was the realization that my father had seen me understood what I valued and trusted me with a legacy that ran deeper than money or land. The boathouse was more than real estate. It was a piece of our story preserved for the next chapter. If there's a lesson in this, it's that sometimes the things our parents leave behind aren't just for us. They're for the whole community, for anyone who ever found a home by the water or a sense of belonging in shared dreams. Legacies are built from more than brick and timber. They are built from trust, intention, and the courage to protect what matters when others cannot. As the week wore on, word of the lease began to ripple through the family. Sharon was not pleased. She questioned the legality, doubted my motives, and tried to draw Allison and Reed to her side. But for the first time, I felt grounded, able to stand in my own truth. I visited the town's attorney, an old friend of Dad's, to verify the document. He whistled low and confirmed its strength. "Your father was a smart man, Graham," he said. He knew what he was doing. That reassurance gave me confidence not just in the paperwork, but in myself. Sometimes we need proof that what we love is worth defending, and that we are the right person to do it. Change was coming, and I could feel it. The boathouse, the lease, the memories stitched into every inch of shoreline. These were not things to hide from or to hoard. They were seeds waiting for a new season, a new story. I didn't yet know how the rest of the family would react or what battles might lie ahead. But as I stood in the doorway of the boathouse key dangling from my fingers, I knew this much to honor my father and myself. I had to step forward, not back. The time for silence was over. The next few days were a blur of conversations that felt like negotiations and silences that felt like storms. Sharon did not take kindly to the discovery of the lease. She called a family meeting, her voice crisp and businesslike, laying out her objections. "Your father never told me about this," she said, eyes narrowed as she slid the document back across the table. "We'd already started discussions with a developer. This changes everything." I met her gaze, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe that's the point," I replied, not out of defiance, but because I knew Dad would want the land protected. Reed watched from his seat, unsure which side to take, while Allison studied the lease slips, pursed thoughts hidden behind a wall of practiced calm. It was the first time in years that all of us sat down to face the truth instead of sidestepping it. Families often avoid the hard conversations, telling themselves there'll be time later, or that silence is better than conflict. But some issues demand to be brought into the light. That night, I took a walk by the lake with Allison, hoping to cut through years of misunderstandings. She listened quietly as I explained why the boathouse mattered so much, not just as property, but as the heart of every good memory I had left from childhood. "I get it," she said at last, her voice softer than I'd heard in years. "I just thought we were finally building something new. I didn't realize how much was being lost in the process." Her words made me pause. Maybe none of us had meant to erase the past. Maybe we'd just been running from it in different directions. Conflict in families isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a string of missed birthdays, a joke that doesn't quite land a feeling you're not sure you're welcome anymore. In America, it's common to see siblings drift apart as adults, only to be thrown together by a crisis or a will or a secret like the one in my father's desk. I've met people who stopped talking to a brother or sister for years over property or misunderstood words. But sometimes crisis brings out something better, a reason to reach across the gap, to talk honestly, to risk the awkwardness for the sake of what might be salvaged. As Allison and I returned to the house, I realized I no longer wanted to win. I wanted us to find a way forward together. Of course, Sharon was not swayed so easily. She scheduled a meeting with the town attorney, hoping to contest the lease, maybe find a loophole or a technicality. The meeting felt like a courtroom drama, with both sides laying out their hopes, their fears, and the details of the document. The attorney, a local who'd known my father for decades, read through the lease with a patience born of long years and many family dramas. Finally, he looked up. "This document is clear," he said, "and more importantly, it's fair. Your father wanted Graham to have this, and he followed every legal step." Sharon pursed her lips but said nothing more, her ambitions checked but not extinguished. I left feeling both relieved and strangely sad. Winning a battle, I realized, isn't the same as healing a wound. Through all this, Reed surprised me. One evening, he came to the boathouse while I was sorting through old supplies. He stood in the doorway, hands in pockets, shuffling his feet. I never said it, but "I'm glad you came back," he muttered, staring at the floor. We worked in silence, sanding down rough planks and sorting screws, the kind of quiet that feels comfortable, not strained. After a while, Reed told me about school, about missing Dad, about feeling caught between two sides. "I don't want us to fight anymore," he said, voice small but determined. In that moment, I realized how much kids and younger siblings often carry the weight of adult conflicts, hoping for peace they can't make on their own. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's that standing up for what matters doesn't always mean going to war. Sometimes it's about staying in the room when things get uncomfortable. It's about listening, really listening to the fears and hopes of others, and trusting that honesty can be the bridge between worlds. I could have locked up the boathouse and walked away claiming my victory, but something in me wanted to keep reaching out a conversation, an invitation, even a compromise, because that's how families begin to heal. Real reconciliation doesn't erase the past, but it lets new stories be written on top of old scars. The days stretched into a patterned paperwork conversations, planning for the future. Reed became my unofficial assistant, helping to catalog supplies and draw up ideas for how the boathouse could become a true community hub again. Allison, once so distant, began to ask questions, to listen, even to suggest ways she could help. Sharon remained cautious, but as the town attorney explained the limits and powers of the lease, I saw her frustration give way, if not to acceptance, at least to resignation. Sometimes the only path forward is through, not around. And sometimes time is the only thing that can soften hardened hearts. As the family tension cooled, a new challenge emerged on the horizon. I learned that Sharon, undeterred, had approached outside investors with a new plan for Maple Harbor's lakefront, a plan that would threaten not just the boathouse, but everything my father and I had once dreamed for our town. It was bigger than any family argument now. It was about the very soul of the place that shaped us. I felt a flicker of the old fear of losing everything that made home feel like home. But this time I wasn't alone. Allison and Reed stood beside me, determined to fight for a future we could all believe in. There's a special kind of hope that rises when you realize you're not fighting alone anymore. After so many years of keeping my dreams and disappointments to myself, it felt almost unreal to have Allison and Reed standing with me as we tried to figure out what should come next. I knew Sharon wouldn't let go of her vision for the lakefront without a fight, especially now that outside investors were involved. Their proposal, modern condos, gated docks, and members-only beaches, threatened to transform Maple Harbor into something shiny, exclusive, and unfamiliar. It wasn't just about the boathouse anymore. It was about what kind of town we wanted to leave behind, and whether there would still be room for the people who had built it from the ground up. Determined not to let decisions be made in back rooms and board meetings, I spent long nights searching through my father's old files, hoping to find a way to make our case stronger. That's when I discovered a battered folder at the back of his filing cabinet labeled Community Plans. Inside were sketches I recognized immediately: the youth center, the public dock, the walking trails we'd once mapped out together. Some pages had notes in my dad's handwriting, ideas for after-school programs, plans for community art spaces, calculations for affordable access to the shoreline. It was all there, gathering dust, waiting for someone to remember why it mattered. I shared the plans with Allison and Reed one afternoon, spreading the drawings out across the boathouse table. Reed's eyes lit up as he recognized some of the places he'd played as a child. Allison traced the lines of the old walking trail, remembering the summer we built birdhouses and hung them in the trees. It struck me, seeing their reactions, how many of our happiest memories had come from the simplest places: unlocked docks, public parks, afternoons spent building, sharing, and dreaming. In that moment, it became clear that our fight wasn't just about preserving old buildings or land rights. It was about protecting the spaces where community could still happen, where belonging was possible for everyone, not just the privileged few. Realizing we'd need more than just sentimental memories to win over the town council, I reached out to neighbors and old friends, asking for their stories. The response was overwhelming. People who had grown up fishing from the public dock or learning to swim at the old beach shared stories of first dates, summer picnics, and block parties. Parents told me how the boathouse had hosted scout meetings and potlucks. Teachers described how youth programs gave kids a place to go after school. Even business owners, some of whom would benefit from new developments, worried about what might be lost if the lakefront became closed off, another piece of local history replaced by progress. Hearing their voices, I realized that we weren't alone. The community remembered what was at stake, even if it took a crisis to bring those memories to the surface. With Allison's help, we gathered signatures for a petition and organized a town hall meeting. Reed became our unofficial spokesperson among the local teens, convincing them to show up and share what the lake meant to them. We printed out my dad's plans and hung them around the community center, hand-drawn sketches beside glossy renderings from the developers, a visual reminder that bigger and newer didn't always mean better. That night, The room was packed retirees with folded arms, parents with strollers, college students home for the summer shop owners and fishermen. I watched heart-pounding as neighbor after neighbor stood up to speak, sometimes haltingly, sometimes with tears about what the lake had given them and what they feared losing if it was locked away behind private gates. In American towns, big and small, these kinds of fights play out every day. It's tempting to believe that change is always progress, that what's new is always best. But progress that erases a community's roots can leave more emptiness than opportunity. I saw that truth in the faces around me, people who wanted new jobs and better schools, yes, but not at the cost of the places where their stories began. Sometimes the hardest part is convincing others that shared spaces, parks, beaches, even old boathouses aren't just leftover scraps, but the heart of what makes a place worth living in. That night, as we packed up the last of the petitions and cleaned the sticky lemonade spills from the floor, I caught Allison smiling a tired but genuine smile that made her look younger, almost like the sister I remembered from childhood. "I'm proud of you, Graham," she said quietly. "Of us." Reed chimed in. Dad would have been too. It was a small moment, but it felt like winning a prize I hadn't known I was competing for. For the first time in a long time, I saw the possibility of not just saving something, but building something new together. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's that real change doesn't happen because one person shouts the loudest or because a few people have the most money. Real change grows from community, from shared memory, from the stubborn belief that what connects us is worth protecting even when the odds seem impossible. Progress isn't just about new buildings or higher profits. Sometimes it's about making sure there's still a place for neighbors to gather for kids to play, for stories to be told and retold by the water's edge. As the council meeting approached, I felt the nervous energy in town shift. People began to greet me on the street again, some with encouragement, some with warnings about Sharon's determination, all of them keenly aware that something bigger than a land deal was at stake. Allison drafted a speech. Reed rehearsed with his friends. For the first time, I found myself looking forward to what was coming, not just bracing for loss. Win or lose, we would stand together anchored by the memories we shared and the hopes we carried forward. The night of the council meeting arrived with a hush that seemed to settle over all of Maple Harbor. I woke before dawn, nerves fizzing through my body, replaying every argument and story we'd gathered in the weeks before. Allison was already up shuffling through note cards and rehearsing her speech in a soft, determined whisper. Reed paced the living room earbuds and mouthing along to his own lines. For a moment, the three of us felt like kids again, caught between hope and dread, sharing the kind of anxious energy that comes before school play or a storm. But this was bigger than anything we'd faced before. It wasn't just our future that hung in the balance, but the spirit of our whole community. The town hall overflowed with neighbors, the air thick with anticipation. Sharon arrived with her developer in tow, crisp and poised, her eyes scanning the crowd for friendly faces. I saw nervous parents clutching petitions, retired fishermen in clean shirts, teachers, teenagers, and people I hadn't seen since childhood. The mayor called the meeting to order, and suddenly it was our turn. Allison took the podium first, her voice trembling at the edges, but strong. She spoke of summer nights on the dock, of skating on the frozen lake in winter, of how public spaces had shaped her childhood and made her feel she belonged. I followed, holding up my father's old plans and explaining our vision for the lakefront, a youth center, open trails, public gathering spaces, amenities for everyone, not just those who could afford condo keys. I tried to share what my dad had taught me, that legacy isn't about profit, but about leaving something behind that brings people together. Reed's turn came next, and I watched him stand before a room of adults and speak quietly, simply about what the lake meant to his friends. "We just want a place to be kids," he said, "a place that's still ours." It was the kind of honesty that cuts through numbers and plans and gets straight to the heart of what's at stake. Then it was Sharon's turn. She spoke smoothly about opportunity and economic growth, about bringing new jobs to Maple Harbor, about raising property values and funding schools. Her developer presented renderings, shiny modern buildings with manicured lawns, private security, and exclusive amenities. It all sounded so polished, so forward-looking, but as I looked around the room, I saw furrowed brows and uneasy frowns. It was clear that for many, progress carried a hidden cost. Sometimes what's promised as improvement looks like exclusion when you stand on the outside looking in. The council opened the floor for questions, and one by one, community members stood up. There were practical concerns, traffic taxes, school funding, but there were also stories. A retired coach described coaching generations of little leaguers at the park. A new mother recalled the comfort she'd found among neighbors at lakeside playdates. Even Mr. Peters, who ran the local hardware store for 50 years, stood up and said, "My kids learned to fish off that dock." You take that away, you take away more than wood and nails, you take away roots. The room fell quiet. The weight of what we stood to lose was suddenly undeniably real. Sometimes all it takes is a single voice to tip the scales. That night, it wasn't mine or Allison's, or even Reed's. It was Mrs. Carter, a woman who'd lived in Maple Harbor longer than anyone in the room. She shuffled to the microphone, hands trembling, and spoke in a voice frail but unwavering. A town is not its buildings or its balance sheet. It's its memories, its friendships, its promises kept. If we let go of that, what are we really gaining? She sat down to applause and a ripple of hushed agreement. In that moment, I felt something shift, not just in the council, but in all of us. We remembered what we were there to protect. The vote was tense. Council members whispered among themselves, shuffling papers and glancing out at the crowd. Finally, the mayor asked for a show of hands who supported the public vision, who wanted the private development. Hands rose slowly, surely, and it became clear. The community plan had won. A wave of relief washed over me, followed by hugs and tears and 100 thank yous that felt like both celebration and catharsis. Sharon and her developer left quietly, disappointment flickering across her face, but softened for once by something like understanding. Maybe she saw at last what all the paperwork and ambition couldn't replace. It's easy in stories like these to frame the ending as a victory and move on. But real life is messier, and the work doesn't end when the vote is counted. That night, as we gathered in the chilly parking lot, neighbors congratulated each other, shared hot chocolate, and talked about what came next. Allison and I promised to organize volunteer days for cleaning up the lake. Reed grinned at his friends and began planning the first youth meeting at the boathouse. There were still hard conversations ahead, still wounds to mend, but for the first time in years, I felt hope stretch its arms wide in Maple Harbor. If there's a lesson in this, it's that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's found in the steady return to the table, in the willingness to speak up, even when you're scared, in the quiet belief that home is worth defending. We didn't save Maple Harbor by ourselves. It took a village, a patchwork of voices and memories and stubborn hopes stitched together into something lasting. That's how communities are built. That's how legacies are kept alive. As the stars blinked on over the lake that night, I walked the shoreline with Allison and Reed, our footsteps muffled in the dew. The boathouse stood quietly in the dark, waiting for its next chapter. I knew as we talked about the future that this was only the beginning. There would be new plans to draw new bridges, to build new stories to carry forward, and we would do it together, one day at a time. In the weeks that followed the council meeting, a new kind of energy pulsed through Maple Harbor. People stopped seeing each other as strangers and started seeing each other as neighbors again. Saturday mornings found us side by side, old friends and newcomers, teens and grandparents, clearing brush by the boathouse, repainting playground swings, and planting wildflowers along the trails. The lakefront came alive with laughter and promise, sunlight glinting off the water as if blessing the beginning of something new. Reed brought his friends after school, their voices echoing across the dock as they dreamed up ideas for youth programs. Allison kept a notebook of every suggestion, no matter how small, and soon the walls of the old boathouse were lined with sketches, hopes, and plans written in a dozen different hands. There were moments, of course, when the ache of loss returned, a memory sparked by a certain song on the radio, or the sight of Dad's old tool belt hanging by the door. But as time moved forward, those memories softened, turning from wounds into reminders of all we'd shared and survived. Sharon, though distant at first, sometimes stopped by to watch the work from a distance. Over time, she too offered a quiet word of support. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, a family no longer defined by its fractures but by the bridges we chose to build plank by plank. Looking back, I see now that every part of our journey mattered. The heartbreak of feeling left out, the courage it took to come home, the struggle to be heard, and the decision to fight for something larger than ourselves, all of it wove together to create a legacy stronger than any building or contract. My father's lessons about kindness, community, and persistence echoed in every new nail driven and every hand offered in friendship. And the biggest gift he gave me wasn't land or a building, but the faith that what you nurture with love and integrity will outlast the storms. If there's one message I hope you'll carry from this story, it's that true belonging isn't given. It's built through showing up, reaching out, and choosing hope, even when it seems easier to give up. No family is perfect, and every community faces challenges, but our stories and our voices matter. You never know whose life might be changed because you refused to stay silent, because you dared to gather others and dream together. Healing, I've learned, isn't a destination. It's a practice, 100 small acts of courage that add up to something real. So if you've ever felt invisible or wondered if you could make a difference, I want you to know your story is powerful. You are not alone. And maybe this is the sign you've been waiting for to step forward and help build the place you want to call home. I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. What have you fought for? What have you rebuilt? And what does legacy mean to you? If this journey spoke to you, please like, share, and subscribe. Together, we're creating a community where every voice counts and every heart has a place to belong. Thank you for walking this shoreline with me. Let's keep building one story at a time,